Consider the last thing you bought that you didn't actually need. Not the thing you splurged on knowingly, the thing you talked yourself into, the one where you left the store or closed the browser tab feeling a strange, hollow sense of victory, as if you'd won something even though your bank account was now just a little bit lighter. Hold that object in your mind for a moment. Maybe it's a coat in a color you already own 3 of. Maybe it's a piece of technology that promised to simplify your life but has instead added another charging cable to the tangle beside your bed. Maybe it's a subscription you forgot to cancel, a snack you weren't hungry for, a movie you didn't even enjoy but watched to the end simply because you'd already started it. Now ask yourself the question that we almost never stop to ask: why? Not the surface reason, because it was on sale, because everyone has one, because it felt right in the moment, but the real reason, the deep, invisible reason that was already pulling your strings long before you ever laid eyes on it. Because here's the unsettling truth that neuroscientists, behavioral economists, and the architects of your digital world have known for years: the idea that you are a rational, self-aware individual making conscious choices is perhaps the most comforting fiction you've ever been sold. You are not the captain of your own ship. You are not even the navigator. You are, in many ways, the cargo, a precious, valuable cargo that countless unseen forces are competing to steer, often without you ever noticing a single tug on the wheel. Imagine, for a moment, a man named Claude Hopkins. It's the early 1920s, and Hopkins is the undisputed king of advertising, a man who believes with religious fervor that advertising exists for only one purpose: to sell. Not to entertain, not to inspire, not to create art, to sell. He is pragmatic, almost ruthlessly so, and he operates on a simple, mechanical view of human nature: give people a clear reason to buy, a logical benefit, and they will respond. He is so confident in this philosophy that when he is approached by a friend with a peculiar new product, a toothpaste called Pepsodent, he almost dismisses it entirely. The market is already flooded with toothpaste, there's no unique angle, no compelling argument to make. But then, something happens. As he studies the product, he stumbles upon a detail so trivial, so seemingly insignificant, that most people would have overlooked it entirely. He notices that Pepsodent contains a mild chemical agent, a detergent, that leaves a faint, tingling sensation in the mouth after brushing. To Hopkins, this wasn't a feature, it was a lever. He didn't see chemistry, he saw the answer to a question people weren't even asking. Because up until that moment, people didn't brush their teeth to prevent cavities. Cavities were a distant, abstract concern, and they certainly didn't brush to achieve pearly whites, a cosmetic goal that felt vain and optional. They brushed, when they brushed at all, to remove a barely perceptible film that they didn't even know they were supposed to be worried about. So Hopkins did something that would forever change the landscape of human desire. He created a problem. He took that faint, chemical tingle and rebranded it. He told the world that this tingling sensation wasn't a byproduct of the paste, it was the proof of its effectiveness. He built an entire advertising campaign around the simple, haunting phrase: just run your tongue across your teeth. You'll feel a film, that's what causes decay. He didn't sell toothpaste. He sold a ritual. He sold the anxiety of that invisible film, and then he sold the relief of the tingle that told you the film was gone. Within a decade, Pepsodent was one of the most famous brands on earth, and Claude Hopkins had done more than just sell a product, he had invented a habit. He had reached into the minds of millions of people and installed a tiny, automatic trigger, the sensation of a film on your teeth, followed by the craving for that tingling relief. And the most astonishing part? To this day, that chemical agent he used had no real benefit to dental health. The tingle was a ghost. But it was a ghost that people learned to chase, twice a day, for the rest of their lives. You are still chasing it. Every time you reach for your toothbrush, you are not making a choice based on health or hygiene, you are performing a ritual that was written into the architecture of your mind by a dead advertising executive 100 years ago, a script you never even knew you were following. This is how invisible chains are forged. Not with iron, but with association. Not with force, but with the gentle, persistent pull of a pattern you mistake for your own preference. And in the century since Hopkins perfected his craft, the chains have only become more sophisticated, more insidious, more woven into the very fabric of the world we move through. They are no longer just in the advertisements that interrupt our shows or the billboards we drive past. They are in the design of the smartphone in your pocket, a device whose interface was meticulously crafted by engineers who studied the neurochemistry of reward systems, specifically, the role of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. You've heard of dopamine, of course. You've probably heard it described as the pleasure chemical, the thing that makes you feel good when you eat chocolate or fall in love. But that's a misunderstanding, a simplification that has allowed the architects of your attention to work in the shadows. Dopamine is not about pleasure. Dopamine is about anticipation. It is the molecule of wanting, not of having. It is released not when you experience pleasure, but in the moments before you experience it, when you are expecting it. It is the neurological engine of craving, the voice in your head that says just a little more, just a little further, the next one will be the one that satisfies you. And what do you think the pull to refresh gesture on your social media feed was designed to mimic? What do you think the variable reward of a notification, not knowing whether it's a meaningful message from a loved one or just a like from a distant acquaintance, is designed to exploit? Every time you pull down on that screen and see a new piece of content appear, you are not checking your phone. You are a laboratory animal pressing a lever, experiencing a tiny spike of dopamine, and being trained, in real time, by some of the most sophisticated psychological engineering in human history. The people who designed that feature didn't do it by accident. They studied the work of B.F. Skinner, the behavioral psychologist who discovered that if you reward a rat with a pellet of food on an unpredictable schedule, sometimes after one lever press, sometimes after 10, sometimes after 100, the rat will press that lever obsessively, far more than if the reward came every single time. The uncertainty is what hooks the brain. It's why a slot machine is more addictive than a vending machine. And it's why you can pick up your phone to check one specific thing, and then look up 45 minutes later having scrolled through hundreds of pieces of content you have no memory of, with no idea how you got there. You were not making choices. You were following a script that was written into the circuitry of your own nervous system by people who have never met you, who will never know your name, but who have a direct line to the deepest, most primal parts of your mind. We like to believe that our tastes, our preferences, our political beliefs, our very sense of self are the products of careful consideration and free will. But consider the last time you found yourself in a heated argument online. Consider the ferocity with which you defended a position, the certainty that you were on the side of truth, and the genuine confusion you felt that the other person couldn't see what was so obvious to you. Now ask yourself, how did you come to hold that position? Was it through years of philosophical inquiry, a sober analysis of competing evidence, a solitary journey to the mountaintop of pure reason? Or was it something far more mundane, something like the fact that the people you grew up around held that position, that the news channels you watch validate it daily, that the algorithms that curate your digital world have shown you 1,000 pieces of content that reinforce it while never showing you a single piece of credible counter-evidence? There is a concept in social psychology called naive realism, the belief that we see the world objectively, as it really is, and that anyone who disagrees with us must be ignorant, irrational, or biased. It is one of the most powerful and least acknowledged forces in human life, and it operates almost entirely beneath the surface of our awareness. You do not think of your political affiliation as a product of geography and chance, you think of it as a product of your own moral clarity. You do not think of your taste in music as a reflection of your high school social dynamics and the ambient cultural signals of your youth, you think of it as a reflection of your authentic, discerning soul. But the chains get even deeper than that. They reach into the most intimate, the most personal, the most seemingly private corners of your existence. Consider the phenomenon of choice architecture, a term coined by the Nobel Prize-winning economist Richard Thaler. A choice architect is anyone who designs the context in which you make a decision, and that context can determine your decision far more than the quality of the options themselves. A famous study in a cafeteria, for example, found that simply moving the salad bar to the front of the line increased salad consumption by over 300%. No one was forced to eat a salad. No one was given a lecture on nutrition. No prices were changed. The only thing that changed was the arrangement of the room, and yet hundreds of people, every day, made a choice that they had not made before, believing it to be entirely their own. This is the invisible hand of the choice architect, and it is everywhere. It is in the way a website defaults you into renewing a subscription automatically, forcing you to take 3 extra steps to cancel. It is in the way a supermarket places the most expensive items at eye level and the essentials near the floor. It is in the way a dating app presents you with potential partners, a seemingly endless stream of faces that you can swipe left or right on in a fraction of a second, reducing the profound, messy, terrifying complexity of human connection to a binary choice made in a heartbeat, trained by an interface that was designed to maximize engagement, not love. And yet, even knowing all of this, even being told, explicitly, that your decisions are being shaped by forces you cannot see, does not free you from their grip. This is the cruelest irony of all. Because the moment you become aware of an invisible chain, it does not shatter, it simply becomes a different kind of chain. There is a phenomenon known as the illusion of explanatory depth, the tendency to believe we understand complex systems far better than we actually do. We think we know how a zipper works, until we are asked to actually explain it, step by step, on paper, and we find we cannot. And this is true of our own minds as well. We think we know why we made a decision, because our brain is a master storyteller, a public relations department that generates a plausible narrative after the fact and presents it to us as the reason. The neuroscientist Benjamin Libet, in a series of famous and controversial experiments in the 1980s, demonstrated that the brain shows signs of preparing a voluntary action, like pressing a button, up to half a second before the person consciously decides to do it. The conscious choice was not the cause of the action, it was a post hoc narrative, a story the brain told itself to maintain the illusion of authorship. More recent research has refined these findings, but the core unsettling truth remains: the feeling of "I chose to do that" is often less like a captain steering a ship and more like a passenger on a train who picks up a toy steering wheel and, feeling the vibrations of the track through the floorboards, sincerely believes they are the one guiding the locomotive. So what does it mean to live a life where so much of what we think, feel, and do is the product of hidden architectures, ancient biological programming, and the commercial ambitions of people we will never meet? It is a question that can either lead to a kind of paralyzing nihilism, the sense that we are nothing but puppets, dancing on strings we cannot see, or it can lead to something far more radical, far more liberating, and far more difficult. It can lead to the slow, painstaking practice of reclaiming attention. Because if there is one thing that all of these invisible chains have in common, it is that they operate by capturing and directing your attention. The toothpaste campaign created a new object for your attention, the film on your teeth. The smartphone creates a constant, low-grade state of interrupted attention, a readiness to be captured by the next notification. The choice architect directs your attention toward the path that is easiest, most default, most profitable for someone else. Your attention is the raw material that all of these systems are mining. It is the most valuable resource you possess, because it is the only resource that, once spent, cannot be replenished. You can earn more money. You can repair a reputation. You can rebuild a relationship. But you cannot get back a single moment of attention that has been spent. And for the first time in human history, your attention is being harvested on an industrial scale, by systems that are optimized to extract as much of it as possible, for as long as possible, regardless of the cost to you. The path out of this invisible prison is not a matter of willpower, because willpower is itself part of the system. It's a limited resource that can be depleted, fatigued, and hacked. The path is not a matter of simply being more mindful, because mindfulness has been co-opted into an industry of its own, a product to be consumed rather than a practice to be lived. The path, perhaps, begins with a single, radical act: slowing down. Not slowing down as a productivity hack, not slowing down to be more efficient, but slowing down as an act of defiance. Slowing down long enough to feel the space between a stimulus and a response, the tiny, almost infinitesimal gap where, as the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl once wrote, lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. It is in that gap that the invisible chains become visible. It is in that gap that you can ask yourself, not "what do I want," but "what is wanting me?" Who or what is it that is currently pulling on my attention? Is this craving genuinely mine? Or was it installed in me by a billboard I saw 3 weeks ago, a conversation I had in passing, a default setting on an app designed by a stranger on the other side of the world? Imagine for a moment what it would feel like to go through an entire day without making a single decision on autopilot. To walk into a supermarket and actually see the choice architecture, the placement, the colors, the music, the sales tactics, for what it is, not as an invisible force but as a visible landscape you can navigate with your eyes open. To pick up your phone and feel the pull of the notification as a sensation in your body, not a command to be obeyed. To hold a belief and instead of defending it with the reflexive ferocity of a soldier guarding a border, to ask, with genuine curiosity, How did I come to believe this? What path led me here? This is not a recipe for a life of paranoid suspicion, constantly second-guessing every impulse. It is something closer to the opposite. It is a recipe for a life of genuine agency, a life where the choices you make are actually yours, not because you have achieved some impossible state of pure, objective rationality, but because you have become conscious of the forces that act upon you, and in that consciousness, you have found the leverage to push back. There is an old story, a parable of sorts, about a fisherman who lives by a river. Every day, he casts his net, and every day, he catches fish. He knows the river, he knows the seasons, he knows where the currents run. But one day, he notices something strange. A group of men appear upstream, and they begin to build a dam. Not a large dam, not one that stops the river entirely, but a series of small structures that subtly redirect the flow. Over time, the fisherman notices that the fish are no longer swimming where they used to. They are being channeled into specific eddies, specific pools, places where it is easier for the men upstream to harvest them. The fisherman can respond in one of two ways. He can continue to cast his net in the old places, growing frustrated and confused, wondering why the fish no longer come. Or he can learn to see the dam. He can learn to read the new currents, to understand the structures that have been built, and to decide, for himself, where to cast his net. He may still fish in the pools where the fish are channeled, but he will do so with his eyes open, knowing why he is there. Or he may choose to go further upstream, to the wilder water, where the fishing is harder but the catch is his own. We are all that fisherman now. The dams have been built, not just in our rivers but in our minds. They have been built by corporations, by algorithms, by cultural narratives that are centuries old, by biological imperatives that are millions of years old. The chains are real, and they are invisible, and they are controlling more of your decisions than you have ever allowed yourself to imagine. But the chains are not the whole story. Because you are not just a passive cargo being steered toward a destination you never chose. You are also the only one who can turn your gaze upon the chains themselves. You are the only one who can trace them back to their source, who can feel the weight of them, who can decide, in the thousand small moments that make up a life, whether to pull against them or to let them pull you. The question is not whether you are free. The question is whether you are willing to see the things that determine your unfreedom. And once you have seen them, the question becomes, what will you do with the life that remains, now that you know who has been holding the strings? Let us return to that moment of recognition, the fisherman standing on the bank, seeing the dam for the first time. There is a particular kind of vertigo that comes with that sight, a dizziness that is not physical but existential, because suddenly the world you thought you knew has been rearranged. You realize that the river you spent your whole life learning to read is not a natural river at all, but a channel, a managed flow, a thing that has been altered by hands you never saw. And in that moment, it is tempting to do one of two things. The first is to fall into despair, to throw down your net, to walk away from the water entirely, to declare that since nothing is real and no choice is truly your own, there is no point in choosing anything at all. This is the posture of the cynic, the one who mistakes the awareness of manipulation for wisdom, who believes that because the game is rigged, the only dignified response is to refuse to play. But there is a second temptation, more seductive still, and it is to become obsessed with the dam itself, to spend all your waking hours studying its structure, cataloging its methods, exposing its hidden mechanisms to anyone who will listen, all while never casting a net again. This is the posture of the perpetual critic, the one who can name every chain but has forgotten that the purpose of knowing the chains was never to merely admire them, but to decide, with clear eyes, how to move within them. Because here is the deeper truth that the architects of your invisible chains do not want you to discover. The very systems designed to capture your attention and automate your choices are, themselves, dependent on your ignorance. They require you to believe that you are acting freely, because the moment you stop believing that, the spell begins to weaken. Not break, perhaps these chains are not so fragile as to shatter with a single glance, but to weaken, to loosen, to become something you can feel rather than something that moves you without your knowledge. And this is where the real work begins, not in some grand, heroic gesture of liberation, but in the small, unglamorous, deeply countercultural practice of reclaiming the space between impulse and action. Consider, for a moment, the architecture of a single day. You wake up, and before your eyes are fully open, your hand reaches for the phone. It is not a decision. It is a reflex, trained over thousands of repetitions, as automatic as breathing. In the old world, the first moments of consciousness were a liminal space, a foggy, dream-adjacent territory where the mind slowly assembled itself, where thoughts drifted without direction, where the day had not yet been claimed by any agenda. That space is now almost extinct. It has been colonized by the glow of a screen, by the algorithmic firehose of news, notifications, messages, and content that arrives before you have even remembered who you are. You are not choosing to start your day this way. You are being started. The architects of your attention have learned that the first hour of the day sets a neurological template, a baseline of cortisol and dopamine that primes you to be reactive rather than reflective, to scroll rather than to think, to consume rather than to create. And they have designed their systems to capture that hour with the precision of a lock clicking shut. Now imagine an alternative. Not a fantasy of retreating to a cabin in the woods, disconnected from the world, that is a luxury most people cannot afford, and more to the point, it is an avoidance of the problem rather than a solution to it. Imagine, instead, a small, deliberate disruption. You place your phone in another room before you sleep, not because you are weak and need to be protected from yourself, but because you have recognized that the phone is not a neutral object, it is a collection point for dozens of invisible chains, all of which are strongest in the moments when your conscious mind has not yet fully awakened. You wake up, and for the first 10 minutes of the day, you do not consume any information. You drink water. You look out a window. You sit with the vague, formless texture of your own thoughts, the ones that are yours, the ones that have not yet been shaped by the agendas of strangers. This is not a grand gesture. It will not show up in any productivity metric. It will not make you famous or rich or more influential. But it is an act of reclamation, a tiny severing of a chain that you have, until now, not even known was there. The chains, of course, will adapt. They always do. One of the most insidious developments of the last decade has been the migration of manipulative architecture from the digital world into the physical world, and from the commercial realm into the psychological and political realms. We are no longer just being sold products, we are being sold identities, worldviews, emotional states. The same techniques that Claude Hopkins used to sell toothpaste, the creation of a problem, the installation of a craving, the promise of relief through a specific ritual, are now being used to shape how you think about yourself, your country, your place in the world. You are told, constantly, that you are broken in some specific way, that you are not safe enough, not informed enough, not angry enough, not pure enough in your convictions. And then you are offered a solution, a cable news channel that will tell you who to blame, a social media feed that will confirm your suspicions, a tribe of like-minded souls who will validate your outrage. The craving is not for truth, the craving is for certainty, for the warm, narcotic feeling of being right, of belonging, of having the world neatly divided into allies and enemies. And the chains that deliver that craving are stronger than any commercial chain, because they are wrapped around the deepest parts of your identity, your sense of who you are and who you are against. This is why the practice of slowing down, of creating space, is not merely a personal wellness strategy. It is, in a very real sense, a form of civil disobedience. When you refuse to react instantly to the outrage cycle, when you allow a provocative headline to sit in your mind for an hour before you decide what to do with it, when you choose to encounter an opinion you disagree with and simply sit with the discomfort rather than immediately sharpening your rhetorical weapons, you are not being passive. You are breaking the feedback loop that the architects of polarization have so carefully constructed. They need your outrage to be immediate, reflexive, without friction. They need you to share before you think, to post before you feel, to turn your attention into a commodity that can be harvested and sold. Every moment you take, every breath you draw between stimulus and response is a moment that the system cannot monetize, a moment that belongs to you. And yet, there is a trap waiting here as well, one that catches many people who begin to see the invisible chains. It is the trap of believing that your own awareness makes you immune, that you are somehow above the systems that ensnare the masses, that you have achieved a kind of enlightened detachment. This is perhaps the most seductive chain of all, because it disguises itself as freedom. The person who believes they are too smart to be manipulated is often the most manipulable of all, because they have no defense against a manipulation they refuse to acknowledge. The truth is that no one is immune. The invisible chains are not a weakness of the foolish or the uneducated, they are a feature of being human, of having a brain that evolved to take shortcuts, to rely on patterns, to be influenced by context. The architects of attention have studied these shortcuts for decades, and they are very, very good at exploiting them. You cannot opt out of being influenced. The only choice is whether you will be influenced passively, without awareness, or whether you will be influenced actively, with your eyes open, making conscious trade-offs about which forces you allow to shape you. This is where the metaphor of chains begins to reveal its limitations. Chains imply captivity, a state of being bound against one's will. And certainly, there are aspects of this system that are genuinely coercive: the algorithms that addict children, the surveillance capitalism that tracks your every move, the political disinformation that erodes the possibility of shared reality. But the deeper, more unsettling truth is that many of the most powerful chains are not external at all. They are internal. They are the habits you have built, the identities you have invested in, the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you deserve. The chain that makes you check your phone 100 times a day is not just a product of clever engineering, it is also a product of your own loneliness, your own boredom, your own fear of being alone with your thoughts. The chain that makes you defend a political position long after the evidence has shifted is not just a product of media bias, it is also a product of your own need for belonging, your own terror of being cast out from your tribe. The architects of the system know this. They are not creating desires out of nothing, they are amplifying desires that already exist, attaching them to products and behaviors that serve their ends, and then standing back as you convince yourself that you are acting on your own deepest impulses. This is why the path forward cannot be simply one of resistance, of saying no to every chain you identify. Resistance is exhausting, and it keeps you locked in a relationship with the thing you are resisting. The true freedom is not in breaking chains but in becoming the kind of person for whom certain chains have no purchase. It is a shift from the negative freedom from manipulation, from addiction, from control, to the positive freedom to build, to create, to attend, to love, to think in ways that are genuinely your own. This shift takes time. It takes practice. It takes a willingness to fail, to relapse, to find yourself, 3 hours into a doomscroll, suddenly aware of where you are and how you got there, and to feel not shame but simply the cold clarity of recognition. *Ah. There it is. The chain. I forgot to look. There is a story from the Zen tradition about a man who is shot with an arrow. The other monks gather around him and begin to speculate: who shot the arrow? What kind of wood is the shaft made from? What feathers were used for the fletching? What was the archer's intention? And the Buddha, in the story, says no. Your first priority is not to analyze the arrow. Your first priority is to remove it. This is the condition we find ourselves in now. We have been shot by 1,000 arrows, arrows of distraction, arrows of outrage, arrows of manufactured desire, arrows of algorithmic determinism. And we have become experts at analyzing the arrows. We can name the psychological principles, cite the research papers, trace the corporate strategies. But the arrows remain embedded, and we bleed our attention into them daily. The work is not primarily intellectual. The work is the slow, patient, unglamorous labor of removal. Of building environments that support your agency rather than undermine it. Of designing your own choice architecture before someone else designs it for you. Of learning, through repeated practice, to feel the tug of the chain and to pause, just for a moment, before you follow it. What would it mean to live in that pause? Not as a permanent state, no one can live in constant vigilance, and to try would be its own form of captivity, but as a capacity you can access when it matters. To be in a conversation that is escalating toward conflict and to feel the pull of righteous anger, and to have the presence to ask yourself, is this anger mine, or is it something I have been given? To see an advertisement for something you suddenly feel you cannot live without, and to feel the craving rise in your chest, and to have the presence to ask yourself, where did this craving come from, and what is it trying to fill? To encounter a piece of information that confirms your deepest biases, and to feel the rush of satisfaction, and to have the presence to ask yourself, would I believe this if it came from someone I was taught to distrust? These questions are not a recipe for indecision. They are a recipe for decisions that are actually yours, decisions made with awareness rather than compulsion. The fisherman who learns to see the dam does not stop fishing. He may even continue to fish in the same pools, because those are where the fish are. But something has fundamentally changed. He is no longer being guided by the current without knowing it. He knows the dam is there. He knows why the fish gather where they gather. And if he chooses to cast his net there, he does so with full awareness of the forces that have shaped the river, not as a victim of them but as a participant in a world he now understands more clearly. The chains remain, in a sense. The dam remains. The currents do not vanish because you have seen them. But the relationship changes. You are no longer cargo. You are no longer a passenger who has picked up a toy steering wheel. You are someone who can look at the river and say, I see what has been done here. I see the forces that try to move me. And now, with that seen, I will choose where to place my attention, what to let shape me, what to resist, and what to release. The invisible chains controlling your decisions are real. They are powerful. They have been forged over decades by some of the most intelligent minds of our time, working with budgets larger than the GDP of small nations, armed with data about your behavior that would have seemed like science fiction a generation ago. You did not choose to be born into this world, this river, this system of currents and dams. But you are here. And the only question that ultimately matters, the question that will determine the shape and texture of the life you live, is whether you will spend your days pretending the chains are not there, or whether you will begin, in the thousand small moments that make up a life, to learn their weight, to trace their lines, and to decide, moment by moment, whether you will pull or be pulled.